Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this evening and especially for being so patient with us and with resolving all the tech that we had to resolve. For those of you who were not yesterday or who were not here yesterday, welcome to the second edition showcase of Constructing Personal Archives 2022. And for Curating for Culture, we marked 3 years, so it's become double special for us. And with all of you interested in these conversations, it's beyond our joy. So very nice to have you all here. The format for the evening is 2 layered. So in fact, for the whole program, it's a 3-layered format where we spend the day engaging with the projects, either through activities or in the form of an exhibition, performance, workshop. This was to say that we need to activate the archives, make them more accessible. And from there, we moved in the evening to sit together and have community conversations. Every conversation also needs a preface or a context. One that I had put down as a moderator for this evening was Reimagining Kinship through Archives. This was looking at the 4 projects that will be presented this evening and looking at the kind of questions or the process that they followed and looking for something which is common, which might also act as a provocation. And using that provocation, we invited keynote speakers. Today we have Dr. Aparna Vaidik with us to set the context from their experience, their understanding. Of course, they have been longer in the field or more experienced, and hence they can set the context for the conversation to flow. So what will happen is for first 45 minutes to an hour, we talk to Aparna, listen to her and engage with her presentation. And from there, we'll move on to listening to 4 of her participant presentations. And then we open up into a conversation together. We have also invited designated respondents for the projects. They would definitely speak to the projects which they connect with, but also to the larger theme that is set for the evening. So welcome to our respondents as well. Architect Pooja Agrani, Dr. Indira Chaudhary, Dr. Prerna, who couldn't be here due to an unfortunate medical emergency, and who was supposed to be the 4th person? Anita, right. So artist Anita is not here, and we'll hopefully see her soon because the timing for the discussion starts at 6 actually. Introducing Aparna. Aparna Vaidik is an Indian historian, author, and educator. Her latest book, My Son's Inheritance, A Secret History of Blood, Justice, and Lynchings in India, published in January 2020, challenges India's prevailing narrative as an inherently peaceful culture. Not reading more of the formal introduction and sharing how we have had some very interesting conversations, sometimes as historians, and most of the times where she sees me more as an archivist than a historian. And I think that's been very fascinating. We connect through a collective called Milli Collective. So if you are all interested in more conversations about archives in particular, look up Milli. That's where I got to know of Aparna, and since then it's been a very interesting journey of conversations and critique and dialogue and so on. So reaching out to Aparna was befitting in many ways, and thank you so much, Aparna, for accepting the invitation, preparing so much. We can see the stress on your face. And I really hope that all the limited information that we were able to send across has still helped you formulate your talk, and we are looking forward to it. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, Ishita. So I did not imagine this as something that I will keep talking for 45 minutes because at the end of the day, it can be very boring for everyone. So I have a mix of reflections and questions for the archiving projects. Like I saw the teasers and I just thought that we could have more conversations because, it's my opportunity also to learn from you guys of, what goes into the process. So I come to this as a historian, and I know historians can also be archivists. We create our own archives when we take up certain kinds of projects. So that does happen, but there is a difference between an archivist and a historian. There could be several, we can theorize this and conceptualize it. But the difference that I see is one of narrativizing. So it behooves a historian, if they are a historian, to narrativize the archive. Yeah, so the archive itself is also a narrative. It's the archivist's narrative, but we go over and beyond that and narrativize either for our peers in academia or for the public. So that's a difference, and I'm coming to this as an historian than an archivist. So seeing the archival work that was presented in yesterday and today. So a few reflections I will share with everyone, and then just few comments and questions that came up for me, and questions that I don't have good answers to. So it'll be nice to hear what other people have to say about it. So what I felt that these archiving projects did, for at least for me, was to help avoid a sense of history where history is a closed and a done thing, as if it's a complete narrative. So that's what it did for me. It sort of proved, it's a way of proving, or it's a way of saying that we need to move away from a sense of history that is history as something closed and complete, and that's the long-standing claim of the positivist history. And in fact, all history books present history as closed and complete. What else is there to know? That kind of impulse. And this is the way it was. So these new archiving projects actually question that mode. And that's why these projects are so important, because they actually help us move away from that particular notion of history, which is generally the popular notion, and also the one which is popular within academia. And what it does is it allows us to engage with the past as something open and in dialogue with the present. So, so it's up until this point, I feel it has been the work of the historians to say, no, the past is not complete, it is open and it's in dialogue with the present. But when you have this impulse within archiving, so that in itself would sort of impact the way we will narrativize. So that's what I enjoy as a historian about these archiving projects, is that uh, at the very root, at the very sort of seeding moment, the way the past is being collected is in dialogue with the present. So that was one. And for me personally, I've been teaching courses on history and psychoanalysis for a while now. And I'm sort of, I follow this historian called Dominic Lacapra, and he talks about history as transference. Yeah, so just for me, I found that connection between the way these archiving projects and this idea of thinking about history as transference. And transference, as some of you may know, it's a technical term, a Freudian psychoanalytical technical term, which actually refers to displacement of one's emotions onto others. Because we're trying to find resolution to those emotions and we are unable to hold them ourselves, we transfer them or project them onto someone else. And that could be, a friend, a colleague in your office, it could be the therapist. And Dominic Lacapra says it's history that the historian projects their emotions onto. Yeah, so unresolved emotions are projected on history. So what is he trying to really say? That our research subjects are nothing but our journeys into the core of ourselves. The research topics we choose have a lot to do with a lot of the existential questions we are exploring for ourselves. And we try and resolve them through our research. Now, if I had, so say 20 years back or 25 years back, I would have completely dismissed Dominic Lecapra as to say, you just don't get your history right. That's not the way we do research. Huh? But now that I'm aging, beginning to age, I'm on that cusp. I see great value in Dominic Lacapra's writing, because now that I look back, and just to take one example from my own research, my first earliest work was on the history of Andaman Islands. And Andaman Islands. And the question that I was raising in the book was, are islands natural entities or they're created as such? And I had a simple answer that islands are not always natural geographical entities that are isolated, bounded, and separate from the world, but they're created as such through discourse in the way we imagine them. Right? Now, how was this transferential? Now, I feel in that young age, at that young age, I did see myself as an island. and there was an impulse to belong, and yet not being able to belong. So a deep, very deep psychic existential question I was exploring through my research. So earlier I would say, oh, that was the bourgeois phase of my life. But now I'm like, okay, that's my unadmitted Dominic La Capra phase of life. So I felt that that's what this archive does. It allows us to not be naive about the way we practice our craft. So it's that positivist impulse is being questioned at at the very level of the archive. So that's sort of the beauty of these projects. So that's one. The second was, the field of history of emotions is a burgeoning field. Like in last 10 years, we've had a sprinkle of books come out on this subject, especially related to European history, and less so for India. We have one or two historians in this area. So history of emotions and how do we think about emotions and all of that is now being talked about a great deal. And but then the question is, how do you write history of emotions? Where is the archive for history of emotions? How do we even archive emotions? And and this question is an important one for a historian because often the emotion that gets embedded in the archive is the one associated with power. Yeah, because most of the archives are institutional archives or institutional recording of history. And that is also an act of power. So the emotion that is replete in the archive is the archive of is the emotion of associated with power, and it thrives on the binary of emotions versus rationality. Yeah, where emotions are seen as subjective and rationality is seen as objective. So as if it is binary, as if emotions are not rational. So that is really what the making of archive is. Unless one is doing oral history, of course, then it's a different kind of an archive entirely. So these projects, I feel, are invaluable in writing histories of emotions because these projects embody different kinds of emotions. And for me, especially Githa ji's and Srinidhi's archival work was especially telling in this regard because I felt that the emotion that they were grappling with was also grief. So the and where the process of archiving also doubled up as a process of mourning. Yeah, which is the outward expression of grief. So, and that was, I found that fascinating, that how the act of archiving itself can become a process of mourning, a process of grieving. And through that, we find our resolutions, and through that, we find our peace. So, and that is such a sort of potent archive of emotions. So that is the second sort of thing that really spoke to me. Then the third is that, archives fundamentally are material remains of some kind. Yeah, or they may not be material. They could be intangible, such as emotions also, but uh, they nevertheless use objects. Like, Srinidhi's um, had that typewriter and his grandfather's suitcase and like that. So there are objects. Yeah. So these archives are fundamentally also archives of possessions, the things that were possessed. So they tell stories of possessions, and these possessions are metaphorical and literal. Yeah, so they indicate. So these are stories of possessions, and they're also stories of relational affluence. Yeah, so which is very different tenor. It's a very different register from power. Yeah. So there are stories of possessions, relational affluence, family, affluence that comes with having family, friends, relatives, loved ones. But then also, it also evoked this sort of question for me that how does one archive or record the stories of dispossession? And is oral history um, is the only form in which stories of dispossession get recorded? And how do we record stories of scarcity? Because there is something, stories of possessions are also coming with a little bit availability, some sort of middle class availability of things being there. So how do we record dispossession? Yeah, what does a archive of conflict look like? What does an archive stemming from relational scarcity look like? do these scarcities then manifest as in terms of the objects that are there as well? Or do they also reflect in terms of the language, the absence of language? So just one question that came to me, and I was like, okay, these are possessions, and how do we even think about dispossession? Okay, then few more points, which are reflections and questions. So the next one is on the idea of microhistory, that these are all telling small microhistories, and the microhistory project that started in Italy, then traveled, it's made its way to Americas. Yeah. Now, the main thing that they were saying was that we are reducing the scale of inquiry. So when you reduce the scale of inquiry, what it does, it challenges the grand meta narrative. Yeah. Or it has a way of nuancing the grand narrative out there. So I wondered what what kind of grand narrative gets challenged in this mode of archiving, because there is a narrativization embedded here also. So the narrativization is not being left to the historian. So here archivist is doubling up as a historian also in some ways. Yeah. So because they're authoring the archive in that way. So which grand narrative are they seeking to challenge? And how does the manifestation of particularity in the form of individual, city, or state challenge the idea of the universal? Because what I'm trying to say here is that because these are individual stories, right? Or they are community stories. Even like the story of Garba would be a community story. Yeah. So how is the particular, which is manifesting in form of an individual story, or the story of a community, or the story of a city, how does that challenge the universal? And or so how do we make sense of this particular, or where the particular, and maybe I feel that it's reversing the flow. So we always assume that the universal is influencing the particular, but here does the particular hold the power to influence the universal, the idea of the universal? Or maybe this binary is something useless, maybe we need to drop it. Does this microhistory actually is seeking for us to drop this binary? So that's about macrohistory. And then also I felt that these archives also had a performative element to it. Yeah. So these archives, because they're being staged, and they're being open to public view, and indiscriminately anybody can walk in and see them, which has not been the flavor of archive. The way we use archives, they're all demanding lack of access. Yeah, you need to show this parchi, that card, and that entry form in order to. So here it's free for everyone to see. Okay, that's new. So, but what I'm saying is there's a performative element to these archives, and what is being staged for us is the process of archiving. Yeah, and where the archivist, as I said, is also the narrator here, and there is a sort of an impulse towards seeking an impact. Yeah. So the question in my mind came: what does the performance actually do for the archive? What does it do for the archivist? And what does it do for the audience? Yeah. And does it go towards, is the impact impulse really about creating a more critical public consciousness? Or is it something more personal? So I wondered about it, because for me, as a historian, I felt it's going towards creating a more critical public consciousness, a more critical historical sensibility. Yeah, but it would be nice to hear what the archivists have to say. Okay, I don't know if they want to be called historians. Archivist slash historian, archivist hyphen historian has to say about it. Yeah. Okay, now two sort of critical elements that I felt, which I wanted to also put forth. So I felt that these archives, though like two archives that I mentioned, I thought they were also about mourning. I felt that these archives possess a sliver of celebration in them. Yeah, and as historians, we've been all like, at least I am cautious of writing celebratory histories. And although there is a lot of historical writing that is celebratory, that is, drawing on celebration, either of peoples, cultures, communities, nations, or events. Yeah. So I'm not saying historians don't write celebratory histories. Most historians do write celebratory histories, but we have to be cautious when we are writing celebratory histories. So the question for us is, how do these archives then, how do they define and redefine the idea of public? And do we have to be a little bit more cautious when when archiving projects turn celebratory? What is it that we are celebrating, and what role then does rupture, conflict, and dissonances play in this archiving process? Yeah, because when we are drawing on celebration, we are also creating a sort of seamlessness. Yeah. So how do we then engage with rupture? Yeah, conflicts. And the last point I want to make is about the archivist subjectivity, because historians are always being asked to be objective, but that's not something I believe in, because I'm like, uh, as La Capra says, it's about transference. It's your subjectivity being projected. So, what about the archivist subjectivity? Now, there was a time when archivist's job was seen as that simply of a guardian, a person whose subjectivity was irrelevant to the process of archiving or the way the archive was understood. You have to go protect it, manage it, catalog it. But now we know that the archivist subjectivity is also embedded in the process of archiving. And um to the point, now the archivist subjectivity is embedded in the process to a point where it's informing the very act of creation, not just cataloging. So it's at the point of origin, in the process of archiving, and also in the end product that we call an archive. So what implications does it have for archiving and for historical writing then? That how do we narrate stories? And this again ties back to the thing I was saying about particular and universal. That will this do the do then does this then become simply a particular, because and which may not be able to speak to the universal, because even in oral histories what we tend to do is we won't just collect one, we would collect a few from a community, and then we would make sense. Although there are historians like Nonika Datta's book on Subhashini. Uh, she is interviewing one woman over a long period of time and then writing a book about violence and partition out of that. So even that happens. Anyway, historians do that. But so anyway, so going back to the question of how do we work, how do we conceptualize the archivist's subjectivity when in such projects? Okay, so I'm going to stop here. These are my reflections on these projects. I know it's not 45 minutes, but that actually gives us a chance to talk.
Hi, Aparna. Hi, I'm Preeti. I've been meaning to write to you for a very long time, over a couple of years. So the thing about you said about Dominic Locapra's loss, grief, comes to personal subjectivity. I worked on my MPhil thesis on looking at Dominic Locapra's theory, the novel Persepolis. And when you mentioned about like why we pick up certain research topic, how it's connected to ourself and how we project. So I'm working on women convicts in British colonial India between 1800 to 1860 to 1921. So naturally, when I was doing my oral history in the Andamans, and I went through people, and they're like, this one woman came before you, her name was Aparna, Vaidik, and she was asking us such similar questions. And I was like, okay. So I have like so many things to touch upon this, but anyway, regarding to today's talk, it's when you say when we're talking about subjectivity of people, how do we? There's so much grief and loss, and you don't know who to trust. Even when you're taking oral history, you don't know which families to believe. It's a privilege that some families get to keep history. I mean, they have the access and resource to keep the history, and there are few families who do say certain things which seems repetitive, and you don't know if you really should trust them, but then you listen to them anyway. You keep who are people and you go through. many histories. The point I'm trying to make is that in such subjective research, there's nothing to hold on to in the larger so-called when you compare this microhistory, which goes against the grain for the majority of things because it challenges pretty much all the narrative, also the law in the making. So it kind of makes you question, like, have you even are you asking the right questions, or how many subjects do you trust? You can't not choose people because they're dead and gone, and the only remains you have are like the very few code narratives, or the very few fragments and pieces. So it's such fragmented history when you talked about the positive school of thought, how people think it has to be like a closed, like a one story to tell. Like one of the hard things with such topics is that even though you tried saying it in a social history way, and it somehow you're able to tell the story and the narratives, but it's hard to narrate when it's so fragmented because there's no closure, there's no beginning, there's no closure, and you're just touching on too many things. So I don't know if it holds value. It's such a fragmented historical thing that you are just collecting. Sometimes I just feel like, am I doing like archivist job? That's how it is. I don't know when I'll probably do the historian job, but right now it seems like an archivist job for a very long time.
Yeah.
I think I'll probably write to you on this because it's
Sure.
not the space. I'll probably give the floor to somebody else who wants to ask you too many things. But great to see you finally.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I must tell you, I'm not a expert in oral history at all. The person who's the expert is actually sitting behind you in that very room, who can solve the issue for you.
Okay.
Professor Indra Chaudhary is there.
Yeah, but I guess we both have similar subjects in the past. Like for you in the past, for me still.
Yeah. So just by way of like, it's just by way of conversation. This is not like I know it better than anybody else, so I can say this or anything. Because honestly, for my PhD, I've told Professor Chaudhary, like, I collected, as you would have yourself found out, I collected nearly 40 hours of recording. And then I didn't write it up. I didn't even transcribe it. So and all those I had, and those days we had those mini cassettes. So I still have those mini cassettes sitting in this one cupboard, and I look at them and I grieve. I mourn. That's what I do. And I was like, why didn't I do anything about it? So that's entire project's just sitting there in my one of the shelves. So, but having said that, returning to the question of what do we believe, what do we not believe, and the question and the idea of a fragment. So I feel that both these things of what do I believe, what do I trust, this is there even with records, even with written records. And that's something we need to move away from, this kind of doubt that, the amount of burden that oral history carries. And why should it be carrying that? Because, maps are texts, all the documents that we receive, have in the archive, the written material, all that is as dubious or not. Yeah. So, I'm just saying that we are being unfair to oral history in that much. And what we find in the written archive is also a fragment. So, and that's the historian's thing, and that's what is, we narrativize out of fragments also, while keeping in mind that this is a fragment. So the past is not knowable in that way. Once you sort of make peace with that, then it becomes easy to write. That past is not knowable, past is unstable. It's like jelly. It shakes whenever it likes. And the one reading that I found very useful to think through this was Dory Lobb and Shoshana Feldman's book, Crisis of Testimony. I read it with my students. I really enjoy. I keep going back to that text because it just gives me strength. And one thing that I keep narrating to everyone, that example I will share here also. Like, so Dory Lobb is a psychoanalyst who's had, I think he himself was there in the in the Auschwitz camp, and but he lived through it, like he survived. And Shoshana Feldman is a historian, and their project was to go back and interview Holocaust survivors. So this was Dory Lobb's transference also. He was finding his resolutions through these, collecting these narratives, because the presumption is that it's an event without history. Sorry, it's an event without witness, and it takes two to witness. So in interviewing people who had also lived through it, they were witnessing the event together. Yeah. So that's one. And then the what he says is, like in one place, they interviewed this woman who said that on one day, like this three chimneys in Auschwitz burst, and they thought that the camp was coming to an end. And they presented this oral history interview in one of the conferences. And then some of the historians started doing quote unquote fact check. So when they did the fact check, they realized that only one chimney had blown up that day. So now this woman had said three. So now her testimony could not be taken, you can't verify it. So it's, one can't use it as evidence. But the question that Dore Lob and Shoshana Feldman came up with was, it was irrelevant at some point whether one chimney burst or three chimney burst. The question is, why did she remember them as three chimneys? Her remembering them as three says something about the impact or the imagination that that event triggered for that lady. And that is what recounting that and analyzing that is more important than trying to get at whether it was one chimney or three chimneys. Yeah, and that's the power of oral history. So, I mean, I'm just saying, just because we get fragments and just because it's patchy or it may be incorrect, we don't know what to believe in. There is something there. Yeah, and that we need to tap into. Although I wasn't able to do it, but I knew it was there. And if you spoke to in Andaman, especially if you spoke to somebody for 2 hours, they would start contradicting themselves at the end of 2 hours, and you knew that they were lying or they had, So, and that was Andaman at that time. So much because so much the present was speaking through this, talking about the past. They were actually negotiating their own present by talking about the past. So I knew that the present day politics, the present day locations were the lens through which the past was being told to me. So, and that could have been the project actually. But I was just trying to be very much a historian and sticking to the records. So that material I wasn't able to use. Hey, Srinidhi.
Yeah, I'm getting all the media energy back. I'm looking forward to this year's workshops. So I'll just quickly respond to the query on the celebrity thing. I mean, that was such an interesting question, because that is something that I struggled with myself, because how much of it was I willing to go back and dissect, right? So that was something that was initially very hard. And yesterday at length, I told actually about this thing when I was giving the presentation, that I think that was the biggest Savarna love flavor I could have done for myself, because the amount of learning about intergenerational privilege, about the kind of stuff that I could go on and on dissecting, we built an entire treasure hunt out. So people right now are playing this treasure hunt where they're kind of figuring these histories while also questioning their own multiple different lenses of caste, class, and privileges. And while I did that, here's an interesting anecdote that happened in the earlier treasure hunt at the Bangalore Metro. So the reference point was that there was this caste incident. So this, I was telling that I'm vegetarian by caste, not necessarily by animal love or anything, and it's only based on disgust and not necessarily love. And where my granny once, there was this dog that took a parabolic beam on her Tutsi plant, and my granny gave an equivalent parabolic shot to the poor dog, and it went away, across the road, and I was shouting. And when I told this story, and my expectation was for the listener to also reflect on similar incidences within their family histories. But the friend, when he next time met me, and I'm like, this exhibition, and he's like, your caste is granny's exhibition. So it kind of became a thing in her name. And I was like, yes, I wanted to tell this story, and also I've written about the stories of our evolution of, starting to wear the kumkum again and embracing Christian friends of my mom, and that was the last person she hugged. She came back to tell the story about how for her children's education she gave away her golden bangles, money, and all sorts of stories like that. But I could not bring in that reflection within the person who was reading it, which is when I kind of realized that systemic issues that come up with an individual story cannot be contrasted with individual's own story. In the sense, every person, including the richest person on earth, is suffering because their loved ones would die. So we have grief. Well, yesterday I was telling about Elon Musk's trans daughter leaving the person because Elon Musk is transphobic. Everybody is grieving or heartbreaks or suffering or diseases or whatever. Somehow within family archives, it's a double-edged sword because I'm looking at an individual suffering and pain and celebration. And she came and inaugurated her own archive while also dissecting through the systemic learnings that I can get out of that. Also kind of understanding the individual sufferings that can come out of it. And I put in a lot more things that I have put it here. Facebook family people, Githa, when I was telling this, she was like, the first thing you want of your granny's archive to put out is get an affidavit that it belongs to you now. Because then I'm speaking of a lot of family traumas and oppression and a lot of other stories. I don't want them to come behind me seeing a Facebook story. So there are so many of these layers which also restricts the person to kind of be celebrating the public facing thing. Whereas when they come near the archive and when they can actually access it, it becomes a lot more loosened up and freed up, which is very similar to even public archives, which we were discussing about how, we would not probably give open access to most of the archives for the same reason of right from litigation onwards to how much of it is a personal letter of someone that I can publicly put out. So in that sense, it is a head fake. It is celebratory. I want you to kick in with your granny's nostalgia and come in. And when you do, you are actually asked to reflect on a lot of these intersections. And that is the way in which I have at least navigated between both spaces. But it's been very cathartic while also really looking hard into my own stories. Because often, I'll just end with it, often as historians or archivists, we go to marginalized Savarna spaces and dissect their lives. And like Buffalo mentioned, a lot of other people ask what Bahujan asked us, would you allow me to come into your India home and dissect your family? And will you allow me to stay at your home the way you will stay at the Dalit person's home with his hospitality, dissecting his history and reading your history? And I think, at least with a lot of our archives, that is happening for one of the first times where Savarna homes are being opened up for you to dissect and critique and discuss, which doesn't necessarily happen from either a savior lens or a research lens. So, whether a lot of these archives, we've had very tough conversations when we have been going around doing dissecting and reflecting. So, I think in that sense, it's a very new thing where we are able to, in fact, some of these homes, like I would never be, as a lay person, I've never gone to these houses. So it's kind of like interesting to get that access to dissect and see and formulate and debate. So in that sense also.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Srinidhi. I think that's great, actually. I hope you guys will write up this and make it accessible to people like us who are not there in Bangalore.
Hello. Hi, Aparna. My name is also Aparna. And so I'm also working with personal archives. And so I've been able to collect a lot of memorabilia in terms of like a lot of vintage artifacts, such as vintage posters and stamp collection. My father was also an avid radio listener, going back to the times of the Raj, which is like, he used to listen to Radio Saigon and Radio Ceylon. He had a fabulous music collection and a lot of vintage cinema, a lot of foreign film those days during the Raj. So, like what you said about celebratory archives also resonated with me. And similar to what Srinidhi says, both of us are talking about our grandparents and their legacies. I have also tried to bridge the gap that you spoke about by raising questions for the future. I'm trying to make it an intergenerational engagement, because I also work with children, and through my outfit storylines, I'm connecting. I'm trying to make younger generations talk to the elders in the family and look at them as repositories of lived histories. So I'm trying to bridge the gap that you spoke of by asking young people, by raising questions. Okay, here is the archive. There is the seen and there is also the unseen. So what you're seeing is like out there, that's a physical artifact, but maybe you haven't seen certain things in the form of certain questions like, okay, you earned this position by maybe working for the imperial services, but how did you actually get to that position? And then if you actually deconstruct the questions, so the immediate answer would be like, say, okay, because I cleared the exams, or I got through this education, or blah, blah, blah. And the next question becomes, but how did you even get to study? And then if you deconstruct it further, it amounts to privilege. And so not everybody would be able to, which not everyone obviously can belong in the same space. So I think, there's a predominant narrative that people of, say, my generation were told that, these people did these fabulous things, blah, blah, blah. But I think going forward, I would like a set of questions to accompany the archive narrative, where it's not one predominant narrative, but it raises a set of questions. And then I want to make it sort of interactive, whereby young people also put in their own questions. There were things that they might think of as an anomaly, for instance.
Yeah, great. That sounds really nice. Yeah. Yeah, so we can actually, so what you're saying is we can actually write or embed the questions about the dispossessed or the, the marginal within the frame, within this
Correct.
also. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like those beautiful landscape, picturesque photographs and paintings that the British made,
Yes.
which actually sort of annulled or made the violence unseen. The violence of conquest was not visible in those images.
Correct.
So similarly, the Savarna materials could be put up to ask questions about caste, or Savarna homes could be, yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of caste, if you read between the lines of working for the Raj. There was a connection between hiring, the upper caste Indians, because they had access to education.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
So you plan to make a sort of a story, like what do you plan to do with this for children? Like, are you going to make a book out of it, or what are you going to do?
Yeah, so I already have a few digital engagements whereby they can engage digitally through certain platforms and devices. And I'm also a publisher, like I run a publishing house called Timbuktu, which is a by kids for kids model. And so I have brought out books which are, about archiving and material. The last one was about material memory. And this time, my book is based on a workshop that I just conducted yesterday, which has 3 generations, almost like passing the baton. So the narrative is being passed down from the grandfather to the daughter or son to the grandchild, and in the form of a letter. And then we'll see how the same memory is received differently by each generation. That's what I'm working on currently.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely. So writing in itself is also something available to only certain sections of society.
Exactly. Except I'm trying to make this bilingual, because some of the memories could only be sort of recalled in their native tongue. So this is the first bilingual book, and I'm looking forward to that.
Sounds lovely. Sounds lovely.
Thank you.
And going back to archivists who might have responses to your questions.
Sure. So you have to understand, I have huge FOMO, huh? Because I'm not in Bangalore. So yes, please.
Hi, Aparna. I'm Githa here. It was very interesting when you said that history is a transpiration. displacement of one's emotion to another, wherein unresolved emotions are transferred, and in the process, it is a sort of mourning, and at last we find our peace. I think that I was thinking maybe after a tragedy, how do I come over it? Maybe I thought it is a catharsis. But then I think, like you said, it is my mourning becoming complete. And I didn't do this project myself because I wanted something to commemorate his first anniversary. So I reached out to the community of his colleagues, friends, and relatives. And what I saw from that, it was more of a celebratory in nature, bringing out certain facets of my husband, which I myself did not know, especially he as a technocrat. So I don't know now. When I saw that and when I brought the book out, I'm still very perplexed, still very confused. And I don't know whether it is a feeling of mourning or celebratory, but I still feel, I keep telling people, if anything happens before they go away, memories, you please document that and keep it. Even if they are living, if you have grandparents with you, let the grandchildren sit, we can take down notes. And at the end of 1 year, you will be surprised to see how much of this conversation has been made, interactions have been made, because everyone has a story and every story has got a value. So now I don't know, I'm confused whether it was my mourning which has got a catharsis, or is it a celebratory? So
Well, it can be both. It can be both, no? That at the end of it, there is celebration also. And the both, it's intertwined also. I think mourning is not all crying and falling apart. Mourning is also reckoning with parts of the person's self whom you're mourning, reckoning with your loss. So facing up to it, and it's an outward expression. And it has elements of celebration also. So, I feel that they are always intertwined. Like each time I feel that I mourn, the way I decided I'm going to mourn my mother is by including more celebration in my life. Because I'm such a boring person otherwise, that I don't have enough celebration. So I'm like, no, the best way to mourn her is to have more celebration. So I'm just like giving a personal example that, mourning doesn't all have to be about crying and being upset.
Hi, Aparna, Githa here. Thank
Yeah.
you for that very nice keynote, which I enjoyed a lot. I wanted to just add one thing, since you raised this question about mourning and celebration. One of the things that my journey as an archivist historian has taken me into is the idea that we don't see too much of in our country, at least. And that idea is history does begin at home. And history begins at home only when we recognize, when we talk to our grandparents or people at home to find out, what their lives were like. And I came to this idea very late, because not coming from an academic background, I always felt very hesitant to, even say that, my great-grandfather did stay back in what became East Pakistan. He never came to India. And, there was a story behind it. These are stories we knew. We never thought they deserved to be in history books. Our history books were celebratory anyway, because they were about Nehru making the speech. And that was independence comes, then we did civics. We didn't really do, post-independence Indian history. And I feel that by bringing this kind of micro-histories out, by encouraging people to tell those stories, no matter how incomplete it is, it's at least a step towards, recognizing that history does begin at home, and restoring history instead of letting politicians tell the story all the time. I mean, that's why I find these projects are so important. And thank you for reminding us.
Thank you, Professor Chaudhary. Yeah, I agree with you because a lot of the history, when it is told in the families, it becomes heritage or it becomes this celebratory tradition. Yeah, so either people move into that mode or they move into this thing of dismissal, as if there is nothing worth telling. And the history that we look upon is this big history, big people history. And it's interesting how over the years it has gotten questioned in different parts of the world. So our need for what Srinidhi was saying, like for the not just people as people moving from one country to another, refugees, but Bahujan communities. For them also history is held up to be those people's histories, those big. So how do we move away from these statist versions of the past, these sort of big nationalist mega versions of the past, to something that's more meaningful for us? So yeah, very true. And I think this archiving impulse is amazing that way. And like oral history, what oral history was doing for us earlier, now these archiving projects are doing for us. So I sort of look into all the historians are not supposed to be doing that. I look into the future and think that, oh wow, what wonderful histories how much of this material will go and make all those nice histories 50 years down the line. So yeah, we would have actually moved away from those histories of power.
Hello, Aparna, Rajitha here. Thank you for your time, and I would like to say thank you to everyone who has shared their personal, like giving us a glimpse of their personal lives, also the history. I lost my parents long time ago, both the parents. So there are a lot of, I can construct these personal archives because I've been hiding away from that. But what I've learned or what I have made a conscious decision is that whenever someone tells me that they've lost their parent or lost someone loved, I don't say sorry. I just say, I hope you cherish the memories. This may be very breaking to the civil norms of saying sorry, because what I have felt personally when I hear someone saying sorry to me, I feel that it just does not allow me to speak further, nor is there a chance for the other person to ask me about my parent or my experience or my memories. Anyway, the conversation just dies, like literally using the word die over there. So when I have tried to have the conversation while saying, I hope you cherish their memories, I have found a way where they are able to connect and that they are able to talk. Like that's how I got connected to Srinidhi. This was during one other workshop where he could understand how I was dealing with my loss of my parents. So I just wanted to put this idea here so that probably it just helps someone or the other to connect. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for this. I'm sharing this on a public platform. I just lost my dad actually a few weeks back. So your sharing is all the more poignant for me. So thank you for that.
For me, it's been 23 years for my dad and 18 years to my mom. I have her ring, which I wear. I've never taken out the ring. I lost it in 2008. So yeah, it's like there's so much that I carry.
Yeah. It's like I got my, you're talking about possessions, what we carry. I got my father's watch from the mortuary. And it's in my little bag, pouch I carry. And I haven't yet taken it out and put it out. And I keep thinking I'm going to break it. I need to, but it's just something you carry. So it becomes a metaphor and a literal possession. And I think that's what I found in the archiving impulse, that there was a metaphorical and there is a literal, possessions that we carry with us and that tell a story of a past. Yeah.